This lecture is on Freud and personality, which is from the chapter 11 on personality. A quote I like from Freud is, "Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways." So I think he's just saying our emotions never go away. They just kind of get buried and then they may come forth later in our personality and the way we behave. So first of all, in talking about personality, let's define personality. It's a rather vague concept and kind of hard to define, but I think the definition here is pretty good. Personality refers to the long-standing traits and patterns that propel individuals to consistently think, feel, and behave in specific ways. Our personality is what, of course, makes us unique individuals. Each person has an idiosyncratic pattern of enduring, long-term characteristics and a manner in which they interact with other individuals and the world around them. Our personalities are thought to be long-term, stable, and not easily changed. And I think in this definition, we of course go back to what I think is one of the cores of psychology is how we think and feel and behave and how those things interact together. So Sigmund Freud, who lived from 1856 to 1939, he essentially believed that the mind had two parts, the conscious, which of course is what we're aware of, and the unconscious, which we're not aware of and unable to access due to repression. Repression involves unconsciously blocking unwanted thoughts, memories, and emotions from entering our conscious awareness. And he believed that the unconscious mind is made up of three systems. The first system is called the id. The id contains our most primitive drives or urges and is present from birth. It directs impulses for hunger, thirst, and sex. The id operates on what he called the pleasure principle, in which the id seeks immediate gratification. And as you can see, it seeks immediate gratification for those core basic needs, such as hunger and thirst. The superego is the ethical component of the personality and provides the moral standards by which the ego operates. The superego's criticisms, prohibitions, and inhibitions form a person's conscience, and its positive aspirations and ideals represent one's idealized self-image or ego ideal. So the superego is kind of the moral conscience of the id. It keeps it in control and keeps it under a controlled environment. Freud believed the superego developed in the first years of life in response to the moral standards of our parents and other role models. The third part is the ego. The ego's job is to find the middle ground between the id and superego. Of course, the id, which wants immediate gratification, and the superego, which wants to do the right thing. Freud believed this is the part of one's personality that everyone sees. According to Freud, a person who has a strong ego, which can balance the demands of the id and the superego, has a healthy personality. So let's look at those in a diagram here. You can see the id, the ego, which is in the middle, and then the superego. The id says, "I want to do it now." It's an unconscious level of operation. Seeks immediate gratification and expresses impulses, desires, and instincts. Let's look above at the superego, which says it's not right to do this. This is a preconscious level of operation. Uses ideals and morals to present the ideal version of self to the world. Learned ideals and morals, as we mentioned earlier, come from parents and others in your environment. The ego is in the middle. It says maybe we can compromise between the id and superego. This is conscious and preconscious level of operation. Again, it's the mediator between the id and the superego. Impulses and inhibitions, the rational part of the psyche. I think rational is an important word. It's the middle ground, the rational part between the id and the superego. Something else Freud talked about are defense mechanisms. Freud believed that feelings of anxiety result from the ego's inability to mediate the conflict between the id and superego. When this happens, Freud believed that the ego seeks to restore balance through various protective measures known as defense mechanisms. When certain events, feelings, or yearnings cause an individual anxiety, the individual wishes, of course, to reduce that anxiety. To do that, the individual's unconscious mind uses ego defense mechanisms, unconscious protective behaviors that aim to reduce anxiety. So let's go ahead and look at some examples of those defense mechanisms. You can see in this picture here there are many defense mechanisms. One at the top is denial, so refusing to accept reality or facts. Repression, which we discussed a little bit earlier, but that would be blocking disturbing thoughts from consciousness. Projection, putting your own thoughts or feelings onto others, projecting them onto others. Displacement, redirecting impulses onto powerless substitute. Regression, reverting to an earlier stage of development. Sublimation, which would be channeling impulses into socially accepted behaviors, something that the superego would accept. You can rationalize, which making excuses for unacceptable behavior. Reaction, behaving in opposite ways to how you feel. Introjection, which is taking on behaviors of someone else to avoid distress. And identification, adopting behavior of a hostile person to avoid abuse. So those are all Freud's defense mechanisms, which essentially, as we mentioned earlier, reduce the anxiety between the superego and the id. They make us, if there's anxiety there, this is how we release that anxiety through these defense mechanisms. Freud's stages of psychosocial development. Moving on, we have a diagram up here, but there is a more detailed description of each of these stages in the Chapter 9 Theories of Development lecture, which hopefully you've already listened to. But just a basic description of these stages. He named an oral stage, which is from 0 to 1, major development weaning off of breast, feeding, or formula. An unhealthy fixation in the future might be smoking or overeating. The anal stage is 1 to 3, which toilet training occurs. An unhealthy result of this stage may be orderliness or messiness on the other hand. The phallic stage is from 3 to 6. This unhealthy response to this stage could be deviancy or sexual dysfunction. The latent stage is from 6 to 12, which Freud said really nothing occurs except developing those defense mechanisms we just discussed. And of course, 12 plus, you reach full sexual maturity. And he says if all stages were successfully completed, then the person should be sexually matured and mentally healthy. So these are Freud's ideas, and it's important to note, and I might have noted this also in the Chapter 9 lecture, that all of these things aren't really accepted by the current psychological community, but Freud was still a very important part of developing psychology, probably the most popular name we know of when we think of psychology. So even though all his theories may have been proven incorrect, it's still very important, again, for the development of psychology. So that's it for the basic ideas of Freud. Please let me know if you have any questions, especially about those defense mechanisms. I think those are very interesting ways that we reduce our own anxiety. So let me know if you have questions. Thank you.